Workplace psychological safety is the most pressing need we have today. But do you have the tools to transform a toxic workplace into a psychologically safe one? We have a course for that. It is called From Tormentor to Mentor, Building a Psychologically Safe Workplace. With this self-study 3-hour online course, you can equip yourself and your organization to understand workplace bullying and harassment. More importantly, our course shows you how to build a foundation for a safe and healthy workplace using the SWELL principle: safety, well-being, encouragement, and learning. Elimination of bullying will only work if a foundation of psychological workplace safety has been intentionally built and maintained. Go to shiftworkplace.co/tormentor to mentor to learn more. That's shiftworkplace.co/tormentor to mentor. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I have a great guest for you. His name is Alex Molden. He's a personal development coach and speaker, and he started out as an NFL football player, and he's a very well-known football player in the United States, and started out a little bit later when he was a teenager, and at the 8th grade. Most of the kids who were in football that were his colleagues started much earlier than that, but he still managed to get drafted into the NFL, beat all the odds, and have an excellent career. Suddenly he found himself out of football, like many other football players. When the different clubs decide that they're going to let people go, they just do. And so then you have to restart your career. And that is also a very interesting part of Alex's story, because he talks about how he worked in the performance fitness industry and also how he worked in the not-for-profit industry and what that has done for him personally. So, Alex, I'm really looking forward to our interview, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
I hope I got your story right. Did I mess anything up?
No. You hit it. You hit it on the nail.
Great. Do you want to add a little bit to your personal story to help the listeners know you a little bit better before I get into the podcast questions?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an Army brat. My dad was in the Army. We moved around a bunch, and I didn't play organized football until the 8th grade. I would play out in the street all the time, and I just didn't know what positions they were. I didn't know what the quarterback and the linebackers. So I did some research, and back in the early 80s, they didn't have the internet, but we did have an encyclopedia set. So I ended up finding out a little bit more about what football was and what the positions were. And so I can, at least when I went out and played with my friends, I knew some of, what football was. And so did that and kind of parlayed that into a passion of mine, and where I didn't really know what a scholarship was until my 10th grade year. And once I found out what a scholarship could do, my whole world opened up and it changed. Because I just thought I was going to go into the military like my dad. But I found out what a scholarship was and what you needed to do from an athletic scholarship. And I just, I put the blinders on, and I just, I searched, and I surrounded myself with people that knew more about football and school, and who had the character that I could be able to glean to make my dreams a reality. So I ended up doing that and took advantage of opportunities after opportunities, and my dream came true. I was drafted, not just drafted, I was drafted in the first round of the 1996 NFL draft.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Well, you must have had some pretty good skills, a natural talent, then plus good skills, plus you researched and looked for opportunities, right?
Absolutely.
One of many people I've talked to who said that their first inroad into where they ended up going with their life's direction was from a set of encyclopedias. And for people who have had the internet all their lives, they just don't know what that's like. But there was no way to find stuff out. I mean, you listen to the news, and if the news wasn't very good, your only other way was the inside of encyclopedias in your home, and then maybe the library if there was a library that was nearby. And that was pretty much it, wasn't it?
Yep, that was it. Or the smartest guy in the neighborhood, which I didn't trust a whole bunch, but
we may be smart, but maybe not truthful or whatever.
Yeah, or they can use intuition to make me feel a certain way.
Yeah.
So.
So I'm going to ask you, if you can share a couple of incidents from your childhood that you think made you into the person you are today.
Oh yeah. So I think one big one was when I was starting to have success in football, and I ended up getting a Fulbright scholarship to attend the University of Oregon, and I was doing everything right. I had the grades, I had my ACT score high enough, and I knew. And I mean, it was in February, and I was just, hey, I'm going to be going to college here in a couple of months, and I started to slack off in school. I started to skip school. I started to hang around the wrong people, and it started to show. In one particular incident, I had a biology teacher, Mr. Keel. He was a former Marine. He didn't care how pretty you were, how smart, how fast, how athletic. He didn't care about all that. He cared about you doing the work and you showing up like everybody else. And one particular test, and what he would do, he would give quizzes every week, every Friday, and it would go over all the topics we learned from that week. And I skipped a couple of days. And when the test came, I went up there, and it wasn't multiple choice. This was it was essay. He had like 5 to 7 questions on the board, and you would have to answer them. And I tried my hardest to be as much as I could. And you would walk up, and in front of the class, you would hand him your test, and he would grade it right there in front of you. And when he graded my test, I mean, he had a just red marker, and he was just, I thought he slit his wrist, and he was bleeding all over my test. There was so much red in there. I got 53%, an F. And I'm looking at that. I'm embarrassed, number one. And this is somebody who I looked up to, I respected, because how he was just so consistent with everybody. And he looked at me and he said, Alex, this is not you. This is not part of your character. He said, I'm going to give you another shot at this, but you're skipping classes, and people are going to be giving you passes. They're going to give you free passes because of your talent, because of your athleticism, because you're a pretty good football player. I said, he said, but there's a time when nobody's going to care how good of a football player you are. And you need to show up, and you need to start doing just like everybody else. There's going to be a time when football's not there for you. And what type of person are you going to be? And by the time he finished, that, I don't know how long it was, maybe 2 minutes. It felt like 2 hours, but I was crying, like just bawling. And my back was to the class, and I figured, people could hear me, whimpering. And it shook me to my core. And I've never wanted that to happen again, for me to be unprepared, for me to show lack of character. And it was just, I felt that.
That is such a great story, Alex. I think it shows that, what that teacher did for you was to speak really to your spirit and say, Alex, be who you really are, not a lesser version of yourself, right?
Yes, you're exactly right, Marie. Yeah, you're exactly right.
That's why it just stung so much, because you felt like, I don't want to be seen as being less, especially in the eyes of somebody that I admire.
Yeah. And we can cover up so much of who we are with what we do, like with what we do, with our abilities, how we look. We can cover up so much of who we are. And, at that point, I started to kind of go down, or it looked like I was going to go down that path, like just depending on my abilities, that was going to be who I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think, actually, surprisingly, of a business conversation that I had once with a contract that I did not win. But I had this business conversation with a potential client, and he was talking about they had so many sales, and they just let everything slide internally. And he looked at me and he said, our sales covered a multitude of sins, and when the sales were gone, there was nothing left that we were proud of. And I was really struck by that. And I thought, wow, that's a long time to go with not fixing anything. He was very honest with the fact that he felt that he had so many things to fix, and that, it just what you said about how your looks or your athleticism or your fame can cover up for you, but
Yeah.
it doesn't cover up forever. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't keep nurturing that character, then it's not going to serve you well when all of those other things fall off.
Yep. Success. I mean, that's the same thing. Like you just said, success covered up a lot of things. But then what happens when there's no success and failure starts to set in? Like, how can you bounce back and actually use that failure to help really find like who you are?
Have you watched that? It's a Netflix series called Self-Made by Madam C.J. Walker, the first millionaire black businesswoman in the States.
No, I don't
It's
like.
so great. Yeah, it's called Self-Made, and just watching the last episode coming up soon. But wow, that woman faced so many obstacles, and she became the first black female entrepreneur millionaire. In fact, I think she was the first black millionaire. And
Oh,
what a great story it is. It was one huge obstacle after another, and she just had to keep picking herself up and trying again. I
mm-hmm.
really, really recommend it. But that's a little bit of an aside, but it just makes me think of that what you just said about the instructor. So
Yeah,
that's a great story. And I think you had another one when we were talking before the podcast. You had another one that happened after you left football that was kind of similar, right? When
yeah,
do you mind sharing that one?
yeah, for sure. Well, this has happened. So years later, after my success in football, and like I said, being drafted in the first round and playing um, 8 years in the NFL, which typically the average is 3.5 years. Within that time, I had 7 head coaches. And so it's very difficult to find the culture, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
culture that you can have success in. You really got to lean on the leaders, from every team. And then how do they lead? But anyway, end up finishing retired in 2004, and was kind of like, I just figured out, you know what, I'm not going to do anything for at least a year. I'm not going to lift weights. I've been lifting weights since I was like 12. I'm done. And I'm just going to play golf, be with my family. At the time, me and my wife, we had 4 children, and yeah, so that got boring. And I kept bumping into this lady in the neighborhood, and come to find out she was the CEO of this nonprofit in San Diego. And I listened to what they did, and I was like, man, this sounds great. And she asked me if I could, if I would come and be a development consultant, like writing grants, coming up with different fundraising ideas and reaching out to the companies in San Diego and, for sponsorships. So I did that, had a lot of fun, had success. I did that for about 6 to 8 months. And then the housing market started to crash, and nothing was really keeping us in San Diego. So me and my wife, we moved our kids up here to Portland, and got here to Portland in 2006, and figured out that, I still had good money. We were pretty smart with my NFL money, so didn't have to do anything. But, still want to be active, and I ended up finding out this role at this nonprofit here in Portland. And I was like, man, I think I can do that. And I ended up applying for it. And when I applied for it, I got an interview. And so I ended up walking in there with my resume, and, sat down, handed it to the lady. And she started, she was about in her 50s, black lady. And she was, looking at it. And then she started asking me questions about their company. And I had no clue. I didn't do any research, any homework. It was, oh, it was embarrassing. So all the stuff that I've learned when I was playing football, researching your opponent, doing the proper, knowing your personnel and whatnot, I didn't apply it to the real world. And when this lady, during the interview process, when she was asking me questions about their company, not necessarily about me, I thought I was going there and I was going to talk about me. She was talking about their company. I had no clue. And then she started asking me questions about myself. And then once again, I had no clue. This lady who I just met, 10 minutes into the interview, she had me stumped on myself. And she told me, she said, Alex, you're you're not going to get this job. And she said, I advise you before you do any other interviews, you find out exactly who you are. Because right now, sweetie, you don't know who you are.
This is great advice, isn't it?
Oh
Doesn't
my.
everybody need someone to be a mirror to them?
Yes. And the thing is like I didn't ask for her to be a mirror, but I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
I needed that. And she walked me. Now listen, I've been cut. Okay. I've been released from NFL ball clubs. And it's embarrassing. You've been there and they release you and you walk, they have security come and they walk you to your locker, you grab all your stuff, and then they walk you out of the facility. And then you go home and hopefully your agent is already on the phone talking with other clubs, other teams. I would much rather get cut 10 times than ever have that feeling of her walking me out the front door and telling me good luck. I walked to my car and I sat in my car and I cried my eyes out. This lady, like I said, 10 minutes into meeting me, she knew more about me. Well, she knew that I didn't know me. I knew football. I didn't know Alex. Football became, doing it, and I put so much into it. It didn't just become what I did. It wasn't just a platform. It became my character, became who I was. And football was gone and I was lost.
This happens to a lot of people when they change careers, happens to people when they retire. It happens to people when they immigrate to another country and they just feel like they've lost who they are. The bottom falls out from their whole sense of who they are. The way you explain that, it's just so poignant and so meaningful. And I think so many people are going to identify with that when they're listening to it, because even if you don't go through any huge change or shift, every 10 years people start going, who am I? What am I doing with my life, right?
At some point when you get with male or females, when they get divorced or when their kids move out,
Oh, yeah.
that becomes such a big part of them. That becomes who they are. So it took me a while, but I found out who Alex Molden really is. But I needed some help. I need to get a coach. And it was the best investment that I've ever made. And I really believe in all different type of coaching, like athletic coaching, fitness or performance coaching, but also leadership. And that's what I had in my life. And I found out how important it is to make you become a better person, a better father, husband, wife, whatever. But you got to know where you want to go.
That coach gives you that mirror that
Yes.
most people won't give to you. And even if there are people that are close to you, they have a vested interest in keeping the relationship a certain way, so they still can't really speak to you in the same way,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask you, because when you started to talk about this, it just grabbed me. So when you were talking about this sort of self-discovery piece that you were going through and that we all go through at different parts of our lives, when you're talking about that, tell me about the groups you were born into, because in this podcast, we really look at how the groups shaped us. So, I mean, you had a family, you have a culture, you have had an area that you're born into, like the region, you have country, there's a race, there's religion, there's the whole being in an army. All of those things are all cultural affiliations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what stands out for you that as having been an influence for who Alex is?
Really is early on is relationships, right? So like the relationship I had with my parents, my mom and my dad. And that kind of started me off where I kind of saw what I didn't want when I got married. There was alcoholism, there was abuse. And so I saw this and I was like, I don't want that when I get married and when I start to have children. And so my dad, his His father passed away when he was 11 from he had a heart attack. And then, so it was just, and my dad was like the man of the house at an early age. And then he got into the army, and that's a certain culture, right? And then he would bring that home, and put like this, there wasn't a whole bunch of hugging going on. There was a whole bunch of like, son, I love you. And even though I knew he loved me, there was no communication of that. And so I just figured, man, I don't want that when I have kids. Another, I guess, part of the culture was the friends that you have, right? The friends that you have, especially, between 14 and 18 years old, is huge. It can help shape you. It shapes who you are. So that's why, like, it's super important for me and my wife that we know the character of the kids that our kids are hanging around. So we make sure we get to know them. And the cool thing about social media, we don't necessarily have to ask. We can just see, right? Your actions speak louder than your words.
That's true.
And so a big part of who I am is the people that I hung out with in high school. And as a freshman, I was hanging around the wrong people. And I was smoking weed. I was skipping school. I finally, after about a month of this now, it was, I guess it was a short time, but when I looked in the mirror one day, I looked in the mirror and I was just staring at myself, and I didn't recognize myself. I said, who are you? You're not that Alex that wants the most out of life. And this is like just on my second year playing football. And I didn't really know where football could take me, but I knew the crowd that I was hanging around with, that was not the right crowd. And so I made it a change right then and there to start hanging around people that's going to challenge me to become the best person I could be. And so I started hanging around athletes that really wanted to push the envelope and go to college. And that helped me tremendously. And I found out that, man, relationships are so big in shaping the people that we are.
What you're talking about is kind of in opposition to the culture that you grew into. So growing into a family where there's alcoholism and saying, this is not what I want, right? And then falling in with the wrong crowd and saying, this is not what I want, and sort of readjusting. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. Here's another thing that in our culture is what you do, right? Like what you do shapes you. And also the success or the ability that you have, that trumps everything. Let me tell you, especially in the professional sports world, it doesn't matter how good of a person you are. What is your abilities? What is your capabilities? That trumps everything. And you can see it every time you look at ESPN, you can see it when guys have these opportunities and they blow it because of domestic abuse, violence, and all of it now is caught on tape. So they think because they're so good in football that they're above the law. And it shows up so much.
That's what happens when you feed the ego.
Yes.
Like having self-awareness is not the same thing as being self-absorbed. And when you feed the ego, you end up being self-absorbed, and it shrinks who you are, and allows you to do things you normally wouldn't have done because you see yourself as being above everybody, like you were saying, above the law, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And even if you don't want to be that way, it still happens because it's almost like when you get promoted in a company and you become a manager on some level, you automatically, what goes along with that is some kind of insulation against other people's suffering. You have to just totally be aware that that's happening to you, whether you like it or not. You're never above that. And I think what happens with fame too, you get really good at something, and no matter how much you try to be humble, it's still affecting how you see yourself, right?
Yeah. Yes. It affected me. And I felt I was a pretty humble guy.
Yeah.
I treat people the same. And when I got my leadership coach and he spent time with me and he see me interact with people and he said, Alex, you have to be careful. I'm seeing something. He put up a mirror to my face. He said, Alex, this is what I see. You treat people different. People with influence, you treat them different than the average person. I was like, what? And then he showed an example that he just saw. And I was like, oh my goodness, I am.
Mm-hmm.
And he also told me in terms of relationships, he said, Alex, you're very transactional with your relationships.
You are very good at self-reflection.
Hey, I've had plenty of time now. And some of it, I didn't want it. I was like, man, no, I'm Alex, the football player. I'm Alex, the first round draft pick. I'm the University of Oregon legend. Nah, it's more to me. But it took time. But when I did it, and I'm still growing and whatnot, but it's really made me better in all aspects of my
So,
life.
you chose to belong to and then actively pursued the football culture. And there is that Army culture and sports culture pretty often similar, right? What would you say? I mean, you were born into that Army culture piece from your dad, but then you chose the football culture. Are there some aspects of that that have translated into your leadership style, even as you're doing the self-reflection piece? Some things that, I work with a lot of guys in the military who take my supervisory leadership course. And I would have to say that they have a ton of great stuff that they bring with them from the Army or from their sports background, that it's not all bad, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of great stuff. So is there something that influenced you from that you would be interesting for people to know about?
Yeah, I think understanding what the good and the bad, because there's always going to be both,
Mm-hmm.
whether from the football or let's say football culture. Yes, for the football culture, especially at the highest level, just like anywhere else, when you're at the highest level, there's there's fame that comes with that. And with that fame, you have to understand, if you don't show up, if your character is not what type of character is needed to utilize that fame in the way that you want.
You have to show up with excellence, don't you think?
Yes, you have to show up with excellence. If you want to play a long time and if you want to have success, there are decisions. Once you say yes, you should already made a decision. Hey, I'm not going to poison myself. I'm not going to surround myself with people who are going to detract me and are going to, pull things away from me.
Right.
It's going to pull me away from this game.
Dedication, excellence, dedication. What about also collaboration? I mean, if everybody's just being their own little A player person, then the team doesn't work, right? So wouldn't you say you had to learn collaboration and teamwork too?
Absolutely. And that's what I coach on is like the teamwork aspect. There's different relationships that you have to make. Leadership is nothing more than influence. When you really boil it down, it's influence.
Mm-hmm.
And so with influence, you got to understand like these pillars of influence. Experience. People will follow you because of the experience that you have, of the knowledge that you have. That's one of the big reasons I followed the coaches that I had, as well as teammates, is they had more experience than me. They had more knowledge than me, and they can communicate better. Especially within that team, you can also use success, but also failure. And with sports, and especially football, we look at failure every day. During practice, when we watch film, the coach is not pulling out everything that you did great. No, they're pulling out the different things that you did wrong so we can understand it, we can assess it, and then create a plan to correct it. So that doesn't happen when the lights are on.
Yeah, so learning to accept criticism in the interests of helping you to improve your game and develop your skill was probably part of that culture too, right?
Yes. Yep.
It's not like, now some coaches are mean-spirited about it and they just, try and call people out and make them feel terrible as people. But I don't think that is very helpful. I think that the helpful coach is the one who will say, this piece that you're doing, once it's corrected, look what the difference is going to be in your game, right?
Absolutely. And how they do it is the really good coaches is they create that bond, they create that relationship, and they are masters of using intuition, right? Which is just how you feel. So they correct you in a way that empowers you and not tears you down.
Right. Now they're starting to use data to correct. I, I just read this article about data science and how the teams have data scientists and sitting watching the games and taking stuff, and then they're giving the data on each of the players and the collaborations and the plays and everything. I was just amazed when I read that. It's it's
Oh, that's a
crazy.
big thing now. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Not just in the pros. I have a son that's he's a junior at the University of Washington. He plays football for them, and they have all, the players all wear these tracking devices, and they track their movement, and they can predict, when injuries are going to come.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the game is much smarter.
Yeah, and it also gives kind of a neutral. So if anybody's feeling offended by it, this is the data. Sorry, it's not that I'm trying to be hard on you. It's this. This is what we're seeing, these things keep happening, and this is where the injuries keep happening. So now we have to change this. That kind of thing. I think it's really interesting to watch this development. Although in the time of social isolation that we're in right now, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of that developing. But once it's over, so let me ask you about your temperament. What you're born with. You have children, so kids from the time they're babies start to show differences in temperament. What do you think you were born with that has been part of you since the time you just started to take a first breath?
Man, I think so. So I'm a twin. I have a twin brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from early on, I love to compete in whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really cool to have like somebody who was there. It's just me and my brother. And from early on, we competed a lot. And I don't care if it was, who could color the coolest comic book, or if it was, our remote control race cars, or, racing in the hallway. I think it was something just competitive about me.
Yeah. What about your personality? What do you think you've grown into your personality over time because you had to overcome obstacles and learn new things?
I think the ability to really take a deep breath and think before I acted. My brother, he would put it like this. I made my brother upset one time, and it was my fault, but he didn't think. And he stabbed me. He stabbed me right in my arm. I had my arm right where my stomach was, because he would have stabbed me in my stomach.
Oh, dear.
But I put my arm there to protect myself. And it was my fault. I was being a bully. I was lifting weights, and it made me feel a certain way. And I wasn't going down the right path. And because I was lifting weights, I was getting stronger, and I can see and I can feel it. And I started to kind of use that in a negative way to somebody who I loved. And man, that was the final straw. And I got a scar here. I show my kids, and he was hot tempered and whatnot, but that just it changed me. It also changed him to become more of instead of just reacting, off anger. He really, for myself, I know I started to think more. I started to be more cognizant of how it made people feel. And I never wanted to get under somebody's skin like that ever again.
Yeah, that's a great insight, a really great insight, because you could go on for a long time justifying anger, and in the long run, it just destroys all your relationships if you do that.
Absolutely.
Can you recall a time when probably that not-for-profit story that you told was probably one of those times, but can you recall a time when your idea of normal came into conflict with something else that you were experiencing, and you went, hey, what I always thought was normal isn't, they call that a cultural dissonance moment, where you just go, whoa, I thought this is what everybody did, but now I realize this is part of the groups that I grew up into, and the groups I've adopted, and that's what's normal for me is not normal for everybody else. Can you think of a time?
I would say the NFL locker room. So I used to have, really bad teeth, like cricket teeth, and we couldn't afford, braces and whatnot. And I knew I was so self-conscious of my teeth back in high school and college. I wouldn't smile. I would not smile. And my first week in the NFL locker room, there was a player, he was a veteran player. And my first time meeting him, I come in the locker room and I'm meeting people and I'm talking to guys. And he said, in front of everybody, "Damn, number one, you going to use some of that money to fix your teeth?"
Ouch.
Oh, what? And I was like, this is my first time meeting my teammates. And I get that dagger. It was like, is this how it is?
Mm-hmm.
Is this how it is in the NFL? They make you feel like this?
Mm.
And so that hit me hard. But it wasn't. It was just that individual. But for a year or two, I thought, man, this is how it is.
So you just assumed that one person's behavior was indicative of the whole culture.
Yeah. 3 weeks into my rookie year, our head coach quits, walks out of the meeting. And I never see him again until I think 3 years later, he becomes a head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm talking about Jim Mora.
Uh-huh.
Jim Mora was a coach for the Saints for over 10 years. And he walked out and I was like, what is this? Is this how it is?
It must have been one shock after another, and you realized maybe you were in a situation where things are a little bit unsettled and that this wasn't the NFL per se, it was your team experience. Did you think that, or what did you think?
Yes. I thought that this was the NFL, but then I looked at other players who have been they were veterans, they've been on other teams, and they had the same look on their face as I did. And so I said, no, this is a Saints thing.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't get any better. We had a head coach my third year and Mike Ditka. And Mike Ditka, if you don't know him, he's Iron Mike. He was the head coach of the 1985, the famous Chicago Bears that that was so dominant defensively, and they won the Super Bowl. He was the guy. And then we get him, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be great. He's Coach Mike Ditka. He's a Super Bowl winner. And he comes there, and it was the worst coaching experience I've ever had.
Oh, this sounds awful. So did you switched though? You weren't always in that same team, right?
Yeah, after 5 years, I had a 5-year contract, and once that finished, he only lasted 3 years. Mike did, and then we had another coach that was phenomenal. He was a former player as well, but there was black, there was white, there was no gray. He said, "I'm going to play the people who want to be here. The guys who are hungry, and know the expectations." He made sure everybody knew what what the expectation was as a team and as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up leaving and going to San Diego Chargers. I was there for 2 years. It's very interesting. It was different. I was there for 2 years and I had 2 head coaches. So, yeah.
So you've had to adjust to the team culture and then also to coaches' influences on culture, which is also very interesting.
Yes.
Because a coach can really make or break it. Any time, it just occurred to me now, was there a time when the team was stronger than the coach that came up, the team culture was stronger than the influence of the coach?
Oh man. Oh, yes. That first year with the San Diego Chargers, we had a coach. His name was Mike Riley, who previously coached at Oregon State and at USC. And he had this college demeanor about himself. And I believe this was his second year with the San Diego Chargers when I got there. And you have this college mentality, this hip, hip, hooray. Like, no joke. After our first victory in the preseason, after the coach did his, after the game, they give their little speech or whatnot. And at the end of his speech, he said, "Hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray." And I was looking around, I was like, is this a joke? I mean, what? And I'm looking at veteran guys like Junior Seau, who was Mr. San Diego. He was the leader of the team. And him and Doug Flutie and, other guys that have been around the league. Yeah, they overpowered Coach Riley. Yeah, they would say, "You know what, Coach? during training camp in the NFL, you have 2 practices a day, and it's rough, but it builds something. It builds toughness. It builds team because you're around each other when you're struggling. It builds something. And but those guys, man, a couple of the older guys, they would all kind of come together and they go talk to Coach Riley and say, "Hey, Coach, man, the fellas are feeling practice was a little tough. Nobody has legs anymore. I think we should, instead of 2 practices, let's just have a walkthrough, or let's just have 1 practice." And Coach would do it.
That's cool. Because it really, when you think about it, if you have a good team and a good coach, it should be a back and forth dialogue. There's got to be some give and take. The coach has the vision, but then the team has to give the feedback and, and some insights into the history and the culture of the team, right? So
Yeah.
we could talk about this for a long time, but I wanted to ask you about, because we're getting close to the end of the interview.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody's going to hire you, and they do, because you're a speaker, and we're going to get to that in a bit too, but if somebody's going to hire you for something, what kind of tips would you give to them about what's the best way to work with you, Alex Molden? What brings out the best in you?
What brings out the best in me is understanding how important leadership is now, and how that can help drive, it can try a change, if you're looking for a change. If you're looking for just a cool story and, some football, I'm not the right person, whether speaker or coach. I'm all about being able to create dialogue and inner thoughts. Like, I want people to walk away from me having tools to help drive a different type of culture in how you lead people. And so that's, I have stories for days, but like I said, I used to didn't know how to connect the dots, with how my stories can impact people, and how everybody has a story. You can be able, now the stories that I have, I've broken it down and I pulled out all the meat, and like how we can use these different pieces within the story. And I've broken it down like, man, what I did wrong in this relationship, or what I did right in this part of the journey. And I've really broken it down. And, I use it now as a tool for good for others, not just all about Alex Molden.
Mm-hmm. That is great. So anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I love being able to kind of tell my journey and kind of to challenge people's thoughts. And I really appreciate you having me on. And, if people want to find out more about me, I'm at alexmolden.com. And from there, I have my coaching. I have an online leadership course, a 6-week course on there. They can find out about High Achievers Academy. And I'm just, I love to connect with people.
That's great. So they can connect with you through your speaker page and get
Absolutely.
you to speak for an event. They could take your leadership course. They can talk to you about workshops and other courses, I'm sure.
Yes, ma'am.
And we will have all of that on the show notes so that people can find out more about you. And in case people are wondering, Molden is Molden, correct?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So you never, with spellings, I always appreciate it when people on podcasts spell out people's names, because sometimes there's a letter or something that's missing and it's hard to find them. But Alex Molden is easy to find. He's all over the internet with all of the wonderful things that he's accomplished in his life. And Alex, I am so appreciative that you took the time to speak with the Culture and Leadership podcast today, and that you reached out to talk to me, because I think we have a lot of great connections, and this is going to be super good for our listeners to hear.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This was fun. This was fun during a time where I guess there's not so much fun that's going on in the world. I'm always looking to be inspired. And so I thank you for inspiring me.
Thank you, Alex. Alex Molden is a great example of staying focused on a single goal and overcoming obstacles in the process, including the surprising obstacle of success and fame as a national football star. In our podcast interview, Alex talks about how being so focused on your skills and career excellence can cause difficulties with integrating into other life contexts. A strongly self-reflective and personal growth-oriented person, Alex offers insights into what he learned about himself and about life, both within the NFL and outside it when he began new careers in the performance fitness, not-for-profit, and professional speaking industries. His deep experience with all types of coaching in his own life demonstrate the value of coaches and mentors for cross-industry success. I really enjoyed this interview with Alex Molden and hope you will take some time to look at his speaker page to learn more about what he does. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership insights continue to guide and inspire your day. Newsflash! Have you downloaded our Future of Work set of 3 articles? Reading them provides you with the cutting-edge insights you need to develop a new career, transition into a different industry, position yourself for a new job, or start a business in ways that are aligned with the trends and disruptions of work in the world today. Make sure you are positioned to both survive and thrive. Download our Future of Work white paper article set here. It is shiftworkplace.co/future of work white paper. That is shiftworkplace.co/future of work white paper. And get started on the news you need today to stay current.